And keep going with that song. Because that song, I tell you, when I first heard that song in 1977, after being incarcerated in 1974, I was coming in from a prison work detail from a long day of cutting bushes and digging ditches. Now, that song gave me hope and promise that there was a tomorrow, and that tomorrow is here today, where I now have the opportunity to share with you my reentry and community integration experience. Now, little did I know that my 11-year in prison experience would pale in comparison to living as a marginalized citizen for the next 29 years. 29 years of looking and standing outside the glass house of opportunity where I could see in, but I couldn't get in. Now, I want you to take a moment and think about a time when you felt not good enough, when you felt insignificant. Think about that for a moment. Now imagine living like that for the rest of your life. Because that's what it feels like when reentry is the sole focus. Because reentry alone is not enough. I remember an experience where I felt so insignificant after being out of prison for quite some time that I actually wanted to return back to prison. Because in that prison community, there was value for me. But I didn't want to go back to prison for a long period of time. So I say, what is it that I can do? I just wanted to get away from this marginalized existence just for a little while. So I said, what it is that I can do that would not take me back to prison for a long period of time? So I decided to go to a convenience store where I began to eat hot dogs. And I would grab one hot dog, I'd take a bite out of it, throw it down, grab another hot dog, take a bite out of it, throw it down, grab a drink out of the cooler, take a sip out of it, take another drink, take a sip out of it. I had no intentions of paying for either because, see, my plan was to go back to prison. And besides, how much time could you really get for eating hot dogs, right? But you know, that was my plan. The police came, handcuffed me, sat me on the curb. The other officer went inside the store. And when he came back out, he took the handcuffs off me, and he said, get out of here. You didn't even eat enough hot dogs for us to do the paperwork. So man, I couldn't even go back to the prison community. So I'm ostracized both ways. But you know, God has a plan. Because that moment changed the trajectory of my life. Because it would put me on the pathway to where I met Eric Coughlin of the Georgia Center for Opportunity. And at that time, Eric was doing a prison reentry group. And as I listened to Eric lay out the plans for this group, as he was engaging various stakeholders and community leaders, I asked him, I said, Eric, do you have anybody on that reentry group who's actually been to prison? And he said, no. Would you like to be on the panel? And I said, yes, are you kidding me? No one ever asked me to bring my experiences to the table. So during my time of working on that prisoner reentry group, little did I know that it would change my life dramatically. Because the Georgia Center for Opportunity, out of that reentry working group, recommended 6 policy recommendations to then Governor Nathan Deal on extending opportunities for those who had incarcerated experience. And one of those recommendations would impact my life forever. One of those recommendations was to set the example. And that one set the example was challenging the state to be the example of hiring formerly incarcerated individuals. And who knows that God has a sense of humor? because on April 1st, April Fool's Day, mind you, I received a call from the governor's office of transition support and reentry to be the first formerly incarcerated individual to ever work for the state of Georgia. That opportunity allowed me to work on the Georgia Prison Reentry Initiative, most commonly called the GAPRI, which gave rise to many of the reentry programs, the nationwide programs that you see today. But it also allowed me to be able to work for the Department of Community Supervision. And from these vantage points, I could see that reentry alone was not enough. Now, during my time of working with the Department of Community Supervision and the governor's office, I encountered many men and women who had become satisfied with living a marginalized existence. They did not want to embrace any reentry services beyond reentry transitional service. They just simply wanted to exist. Now, I know what that feels like. I know what it feels like to not see possibility. Because I, for a long time, did not see the value of education. Who's going to hire me? I'm a formerly incarcerated individual, so why do I go back to school for? Until a friend of mine said, education does not guarantee you anything, but allow you to put your name in the hat. Now that made sense to me because then I could see possibility. But my negative self-talk was still working overtime. Because in my first day of class, I waited until everybody left the room, and I walked up to the professor, and I said, do you know that I'm a formerly incarcerated individual, that I've been to prison? I was fully expecting him to uphold the negative self-image that I had of myself. But he didn't do that. He said, use that experience while you're here at this university. And it was at that moment that I realized that my life experiences had value, that my experience was part of my whole human experience, and I went on to graduate with a bachelor's degree in psychology, summa cum laude. Now, the sad reality is I could have done that years ago had I understood that reentry alone is not enough. Don't get me wrong, reentry services that focuses on food, clothing, shelter, transportation, employment, and the creation of opportunities are vital components of the reentry process. But community integration that helps the marginalized citizen to embrace those very same opportunities, to move to a place of accountability, possibility, and sustainability are just as vital. Refocusing the justice system to include community integration requires a fundamental paradigm shift. In my experience, individual choice combined with reentry and community integration practices holds the best promise to further reduce recidivism. The Georgia Center for Opportunity success sequence, with its focus on education, work, and family, and is an example of such forward thinking. As we look towards tomorrow, developing new ideas of recidivism reduction, perhaps we should heed the words of Albert Einstein, who said that we cannot solve a problem at the same level of consciousness that we created it. So I'll leave you with this thought. What if community reintegration became the goal and reentry marks the first step. Because reentry alone is not enough. Thank you for your time.